Module 5, Reflective Vlog, working with challenging parents. So I remember in my first year of spec ed teaching, I'd already been teaching for 3 or 4 years, but I transitioned into teaching special education. I started to work with a family, and I'll call the student Mike. So Mike's family, when my colleagues found out that Mike would be working with me, the new guy in the department, there was sort of a collective sigh of relief. And throughout the semester, I found out more and more details as to why that was. But at the time, I just kind of took it as people, they were pretty happy to sort of, there was something about Mike that just made it challenging to work with him. So throughout the semester, what I ultimately became a part of was something that I'll call, and I've called it this since, was being at the kitchen table. And what that means for me is when you feel like, as the teacher, you're drawn into the relationship of the family, but maybe not in a sort of a healthy, good way. To give a general example, when I was working with students that had been suspended and expelled, we had to do intake meetings. So this was many years after working with Mike. And at the intake meeting, a parent, guardian always had to be there, as did the student. And sometimes those intake meetings, which was, they were an introduction to the programming. It was to get some strengths and challenges for the student. It was to see where their coursework had been and kind of make a small plan around what their time with us would look like. Sometimes fights between the parents and the kids would break out at the table. One physical fight, there was a little bit of, aggression, and we were like, shutting that down, but like aggression, verbal aggression, and kind of shutting that down. And then other times it was just kind of low level disagreements at the table where there wasn't happiness there. Now, it's understandable. The student was about to be, engaged in suspension and expulsion programming. But it was just at the kitchen table was that feeling for me, like suddenly I was no longer in a classroom setting, or let's say a controlled setting of a classroom. I was witnessing their relationship in its purest form. So, maybe their behaviors to each other when they're away from school. And in some ways getting a glimpse at maybe some of the stuff that was creating challenges for the kid at school. So working with Mike very quickly became that type of relationship. And at the time, I didn't really have the tools to sort of get distance from that. I was still very much looking at my teaching in a uphill kind of fashion. Like I still have a lot to learn. But at the time I was still in that very fresh, still trying to figure out, how do I teach? How do I be an adult? I came from another career. So what does it mean to transition out of that career? I had life stuff going on. I had my own sort of kitchen table stuff going on, but trying to control it so that I could be professional at school. So Mike's family started off at the kitchen table really, really quick. When communicating with Mike, he made it clear that I shouldn't even really talk to him about spec ed stuff, or his preferences as far as IEP design, his sort of pathways planning. He just sort of pushed me off, and he said, talk to my parents. And at the time, I guess without really I didn't have a clear understanding of the value of having a student involved in their own IEP design. Not really something that was heavily covered in my Spec Ed 1 AQ, to be truthful. I knew I had to have one created, but there really wasn't any concept of co-learning with the IEP. Not from what I was shown. Other jurisdiction might be doing, but I didn't have any clue about that. So I knew that I was on the hook to deliver an IEP. I knew that there were elements that I would ask him about, but he was not having it. He directed me to talk to the parents. I quickly found out that at this time, the family was in process. They were in big changes. The parents were in the process of separating. So what that created, the dynamic that created, is that Mike didn't want to talk about stuff because he said his parents took care of everything. I couldn't always get both parents into the conversation because there was some animosity between the two of them. So whenever I talk to Mike, then I'm talking to Mike's dad, and then I'm talking to Mike's mom, and then trying to get some sort of a sense that both of them knew that the other had been told as well. So it was like this triangulation thing that became really, really difficult to manage. Sometimes, and beyond the sort of communicating with the two different parents, they also would then tell Mike to do something, and then the other one would tell Mike to do something. So it was really dynamic, and the fact that I didn't have a real idea of how to, you know what part of it was? Here was the problem, is that I think I thought it was up to me to be the peacemaker in this family. And that really became problematic, because in trying to be the peacemaker, it really stopped me from doing primarily what I should have done, which was just focusing on the kids' understanding. I'll throw that right out here. Like, I think I spent more time appeasing the feelings and the mental state of both of Mike's parents than I did really measuring how I could help Mike develop his advocacy skills. So playing back the game tape and thinking about what I would definitely do differently, and what I have done differently since then, is when I'm presented with that situation, I have since that I am focusing a lot, the predominant amount of my time, on working with the kid, because ultimately the kid, there's no guarantee they're going to be with me for more than a year, right? So we went through the in-class learning strats, then we went into the actual resourcing, and then Mike was off to work with another teacher. Thinking back, my time would have been better spent working with Mike on his self-advocacy skills and helping Mike kind of parse out what the two different expectations were of his parents. That whole semester I spent way too much time talking to the parents about strategies and never really getting to strategies with Mike. So that's my first, my biggest sort of takeaway from that. It was never that either one of the parents were necessarily belligerent with me. But as soon as there was any discussion around building strategy to help Mike, then that's when there would be across the table kind of belligerence, where one parent would say, well, the other's irresponsible, not going to do it. And then it would just kind of like break down from there. So I have to be honest, this is when, I think this is when I discovered carbon copy. Like, I didn't have any sense of carbon copy email prior to this. And also realizing that carbon copy BCC is also important, because they both said they didn't want to share emails with each other. So everything became BCC. Everything became, if I knew I was going to make a phone call to one parent, then I also made sure that I made time for a phone call to the other parent. And I kind of had, the way I kind of played it was, to be honest, is I would check to see who was sort of where Mike was staying. Because what I found was, because Mike was sort of doing dual custody, he was going to two different family spaces, is that it was really important for the person where Mike was living that I felt like I could sort of speak directly to that moment, and then call the other parent and let them know that I had called, the other parent. I would sort of update them. And so the next layers to this, and thinking back, I would have done differently. I didn't bring in my spec ed head with as much detail as I should have. I'll end up talking to my colleagues to find out what was going on. But basically, everything that I was seeing going on at the kitchen table with the parents splitting was in motion from grade 9 and grade 10. So a lot of my colleagues, part of what they had been a part of was the slow lead up to the separation. I was just there for the separation and ultimately for the divorce as well. I should have brought in my department head far sooner. I should have brought in the department head at least to sort of consult on something. It wasn't until we're in second semester, after I had made headway with the family, but I feel like I should have went in as far as figuring out from the head better and clear communication tools about Mike's needs, because I was still, for me to actually speak to the data that I was observing in the class, I wasn't strong enough to do it. And this was a family that had already been strongly advocating for this kid the whole way, so they were more savvy in the language of spec ed than I was. Another thing that I definitely would have done differently is I would have brought in an administrator, not to be someone that was like someone, just another go-to, someone to a part of it, I guess it could have been a heads up to let them know that this parent is cycling through this again. They may have had some institutional knowledge as well, as that they could have shared with me as far as their interactions with the family and some strategies on how to deal with well, parents that are that aggressive. I think also just to let them know, and this is where I think about with the leadership hat right now, is that I was really struggling to keep up with this portfolio. I had several students that were in this exact same shape, but keeping up with Mike and his parents was, it took up a lot of my time, and I didn't feel like I was making progress. So this was having some wear and tear on my wellness, my personal wellness. And I think had I let them know, if I hadn't sort of, I guess, buried it under my pride, like I can do this work, I can get done, I can do this. Had I reached out and actually spoke, I think I probably could have gotten some strategy, some support that could have actually improved my wellness in that time. And also thinking now as a, if I'm put on the leader hat, it's really important for me to sort of know how my staff are faring, how they're doing in their portfolios. It isn't a simple thing just to say, just because you have a qualification that everything's going to go swimmingly. You went to university to teach English, so good luck teaching English. And I think that this is one of the blind spots in my the way that I kind of connect with adults, is that I kind of have this high expectation of agency when someone's been given a portfolio or a task, and that it's for them to come back and ask me for help. But I think as the leader, my work will be done on noticing that they need help. I think finally the thing that, if I think back, one of the things that I did well is that I didn't take it personally. I did a little bit only because I think I wanted to build a good relationship. But one of the tools that I brought with me from a former workplace, I worked in hospitality, a very sort of high energy, frenetic space, is that shifting from taking things personally to looking for a solution was a pivot that I was used to doing. So I didn't spend too much time. It wasn't like a 90-degree turn for me to go from someone getting really upset to me, boom, hit a wall, turn left, and then get to problem solving. I kind of sometimes glance off of it. So I know I can start to see that energy coming, and I can kind of start to veer off in order to keep the momentum going and keep strategizing. So the fact that this family was so intensive and sometimes getting very upset, the one thing that I picked up on consistently, which maybe my colleagues didn't, is that they weren't upset with me. They were just really upset with each other. But being in the room with it made it feel like this was a problem for me and this was being directed at me. There was a lot of rescheduling of meetings because they just couldn't get along. But I think that looking back, that's something definitely I will take into whatever leadership's positions I encounter, but that I don't take the attack as personal right away. There has to be some pretty specific legwork on somebody else's end for me to feel like they're actually coming at me. And being in the restaurant business and being in kitchens and doing the front of the house, it was often that someone was mad around me, but not actually mad at me. And I think if you can mentally make that pivot, it's a really valuable tool to kind of de-escalate your thinking, sort of, get your amygdala under control and start listening again. And that's what I spent a lot of time doing with this family. It was unfortunate that I only got to spend the 1 year with them, and then Mike was actually working with another teacher, because I did make headway to where in the second semester, the parents I had them in the school. We actually did a parent-teacher night where I had them in 2 different classrooms, and I walked with Mike back and forth. And I did get them in for one meeting together near the tail end when we were just kind of wrapping up the school year. It was very quick, but we got to some sort of success. At least it was a good send-off. And though they weren't really talking to each other, they were in the same space where they recognized that the group of us, even though it was really fractured, we got some good work done for Mike that year. So there was a bit of a win there. I think, that's what I think about working. That parent, that family really did test me. I was underskilled. I was overwhelmed. I didn't let people know that I needed help. I had a self-expectation that I should be able to do it myself, and trying to make peace in the family kept on putting me at the kitchen table, which ultimately didn't let me use even some of the tools that I had as a teacher. So I remember that a lot. Mike and his family. I hope they're doing well these days. All right, thank you very much. Have a great day.